Dear all, welcome to this webinar. It's a great pleasure to talk about the topic related to creating a single program culture. We have the chance to have with us Garry Baxter, an international director of programs with a very great experience, and he will guide us through this webinar. Thanks, Garry, and up to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Matteo, and thank you for the opportunity for me to share my thoughts with everybody on the webinar. I've been now for plus minus 25 years in having hands-on experience across different programs across the globe. I've managed many projects with over 200 personnel. We had big programs that specifically around the modernization of infrastructure in the payments area, and budgets that exceed over 300 million over the duration of that project and that program, and been recognized for excellence within the project. But I think the main experience that I've had is working with teams and multiple teams across and different organizations as we go along and as we implement these projects. In 9 out of 10 cases, a lot of the projects go and use and involve multiple organizations. And the topic today, we'll talk about it, is going to be around how do we foster and how do we create that single program culture? Because in order to be successful, we need that single culture, a single team. And I'll move on onto the next slide and give you a definition of what I feel is a single program culture. And what that is, it's really at the essence of it. It's bringing the organizations that are involved on the program, bringing them together and creating a one-team culture. Now, what does that mean? A one-team culture is that we have different organizations brought on to perform specific tasks or specific functions on the program and the expertise in that area. But in order to be successful, that all those organizations have to work together in unison and have a single team mentality. And this webinar, I will take you through what I believe and share my thoughts with you on how we do that, what the challenges are. And if we go, basically, we will be going through these 7 topics as we go through them. And mainly it is, what is a single program culture? And then I'll take you through some practical examples of, I've just recently finished a huge program where we had multiple organizations working together to be successful. Then we will look at why is it important to create this single program culture? And then the challenges that we may have and we will face in creating that single culture, and then how will we address those challenges? And ultimately, at the end of the day, once everything has been done, it comes down to basically one thing, and that is trust in your fellow team member, your fellow organization, and the importance of that trust, which is the foundation of creating this multiple or the single culture. And then at the end, we'll finish off with some conclusions and some key takeaways that we can use going forward. So what is a single program culture. Basically, it focuses the overall program and the goals and the aim of the program. Everyone working on the program has the understanding of what that outcome is supposed to be, what the expectations of the outcome is, and how we're going to achieve that. And it emphasizes collectively a ownership, transparency, and integration through all the organizations. And basically, what it does, in order to have this single program culture, you've got to have a common identity. What does a common identity mean? It basically boils down to that the program as a whole has a single identity, and everyone working within that program takes on that program identity and puts aside their individual organization's identity and works together to form and to achieve what the goal is. And in doing so, there needs to be collaboration across those organizations, and encourages that we have this collaboration between the different organizations and working together. With that collaboration and with the teams coming together, there has to be accountability. In order for this culture to grow and to foster, you have to have accountability. So each area, each organization, each team, each area of expertise has to understand what they are accountable for. And once we understand that, and that expectation of that accountability is understood by all, so then you can start building on this culture. But ultimately, the foundation is all around trust. So your trust in your fellow member, team member, the different organizations working together, there has to be that trust. And trust is built over the period of the program. You don't just get trust automatically. It has to be built, and that in doing so, you start off building that foundation, and then everything else comes together. So I had the fortunate opportunity to work on a program these last 5 years, which was a huge program that became. There were, I think, 7 distinct organizations that were working together to implement a modernization of a payment system in a country that was huge. There were 17 participants, organizations, financial institutions that had to come together with the project team, with the different organizations working. Each one had their speciality and their expertise. And this program went over a 4-year period. And over that period, we did a lot of planning. We planned right in the beginning of the program. We went through, we understood, we got the teams together. And with that, we did the planning 3 years before we went live. And basically, at the end of everything, when we were ready, we went live within 1 month of our date that we had committed to 3 years prior. And in order to achieve that, we had to work as a single entity, a single program, working and put each organization's self-motivation or their own interests at bay. And we had to look at the program and the interests of the program. And we managed to achieve that. how did we do that? So why did we do that, and how did it, and what made this program different and successful was the fact that the leadership of the program recognized what the importance of having this culture and everybody working together, because there were areas where these organizations had to come in, and their contribution was critical to the success of the program. We had a structure that was set up where everybody was able to be heard. So with that, we made sure that within the structure, people's voices could be heard. The governance structure was set up that we would have the meetings, we would have sessions, we would work together, and that there was a forum where you could address any of the issues that you had, and that there was no, we did not tolerate a blaming. So one organization blaming the other. If there were issues, we sat down, we openly discussed those issues. There was transparency. We encouraged the transparency. And most of all, there was respectful challenges, and we accepted that, and we wanted that to happen, and we expected that the challenges did take place, but in a respectful manner. That is the key here, is to ensure that that when we challenged and when we spoke about things, we did it in a respectful manner. And no matter what the role an individual or an organization was playing or fulfilling in the project, it was respected. Every role, every contribution was needed and respected. And we continuously played, and we continuously ensured that all these things came together. It wasn't at the start of the project and then we said, this is the guiding principles and this is what we expect from you. No, we lived this every single day. We worked on it. We addressed any issues. We addressed conflict as it happened, and we did not let it fester. And with that came trust, came an understanding, expectations were well understood, and problems were addressed, and collectively we worked on the problem and the solution for the problem as to what was best for the program. So individuals and individual wants and needs were put aside for the betterment of the program. Now, on the other side, I have had, I would say, not so good success stories where these type of things did not happen. And what you got on where there was not a single culture, what was happening is that everybody was working and looking at their own individual organization's needs and expectations and wants, rather than looking at it from a holistic perspective. What that meant is that you had separate levels of management. So you would have the different management, you'd have closed door discussions with the customer and the organization. Without the other organization, what the consequence of that was mistrust, and that the transparency was not there. And the timelines, the next symptoms was that the timeline started slipping, and you were in constant replanning mode. And what was going on is that the fact that the transparency and the trust between people was gone. And it was hard to get that trust back, because everything then went from rather from managing a program At a relationship level, you started managing the program from a contractual perspective, where instead of the business people starting to understand and interpret the contract and working within the contract and their understanding and going outside the boundaries, obviously not to the detriment of any of the organizations. What happened that you started getting the lawyers running and interpreting and forcing the project. And when that happens, you have major distrust in the program, and everybody starts wanting to cover their asses. And based on that is that everyone is so apprehensive to rather speak the truth and to be open. Is then I've got to watch what I say. I've got to make sure that I don't put my organization in a bad light. And what happens, things just become very tough. And what you see then is you start getting turnover in people. The timelines start going out of kilter. You start getting delays, and then you start getting finger pointing. And no one, and a lot of you have been in managing projects, been working in projects, and has seen somewhere along your careers, you have seen this happen. And this is what happens when you don't have that common single culture within the program, understanding and looking at what is best for the program. So the next is why is it so important to have a single program culture? Well, what you find in having the single culture, you align the efforts of the multiple organizations working together on complex programs. You have to have that alignment, and this single culture brings that together. What you start getting then is improved communication. So what happens? People start feeling open to speak about things, to bring up issues, to address issues from a program perspective, and you get transparency. With that, you reduce the conflict between teams and organizations, and you align on what the priorities are, and you're open, and then becomes less internal friction between team members, and people start working together. What happens there, you reduce the conflict and friction, you increase the accountability, because now what happens is that I take ownership of what I've got to do, or my organization, and you increase that accountability. As soon as you've got accountability, you then take ownership of that, and you make sure that what you have committed to, you achieve, understanding that there is consequences to not meeting your commitments. And that starts with taking accountability. Second, and again, you get better collaboration with people. So now what happens, you start managing and you start working on the program, and there is better collaboration because people have got a common understanding, a common will, and the common identity of the program becomes important. So all in all, what happens is the fact that now when a program runs into issues and there is changes, because it's inevitable that there will be changes in a program and there will be issues along the program. What happens when you have this single culture, everybody working together, you can adapt rapidly, you can pivot quickly, you can address the problems in a more transparent way, where everybody is involved, everybody has an understanding the cause and what is the best solution for the program rather than the individual. And this is what happens when you do have a single program culture, and which is critically important for then the success. If we move on to then the challenges, so what are the challenges that we have and in creating this single program culture? I think the most critical point is to understand and to get everybody and having a single shared vision is everybody on the team seeing themselves as one program, a common identity, and putting the organization's affiliations aside. So when you go into this program, when you go in, the biggest challenge I see coming forward and changing the mindset of the people is having them see themselves as a single program and putting what they know and their organization and affiliations aside and focusing purely on the program. That to me is the critical point to overcome those barriers. And I think having that, once you get that, is then the workflow and systems working that together, having unshared vocabularies. What does that mean? Understanding. So my organization, we did this. This is what we understand the vocabulary to be, the nuances around that, and overcoming that and working together on a shared vocabulary, shared nuances, shared and working together in that. Then the third challenge is a fragmented reporting structure. So what happens in this reporting is to move away where you have the project team from this organization working, and then separately they are reporting up to their executives and internally to their organization on a message that could be different to what the message is of the program. And the challenge is to ensure that all organizations, good or bad, whatever the news is, that it is from a shared perspective and that everybody has the right message and a single understood message going through up into their organizations, and that there's not mixed messages. The third or the fourth area is the reluctance to take ownership. What does that mean? That means that a organization or a team is apprehensive to take ownership of what they got to do or what the expectation is. And that all leads to what understanding the expectations. If I don't understand my expectations or what is expected of me, how can I then take ownership of it? And I think getting a common understanding and expectations of everybody, once that has been done and you overcome that challenge, so then you can move forward. Secondly, I think lastly, I think the area is around how you approach problem solving and the delivery. So each organization has its own methodologies and that they've worked with, and how they address the problem solving within the program as it goes forward. I think the challenge there is aligning all the organizations together and understanding what that delivery approach is, and getting all the organizations to buy into a single delivery model that is good for the program. And that does not mean that you have to have just a single, either waterfall or agile or whatever methodology there is. It's understanding that you could have hybrids where it makes sense. So it could be a combination of a waterfall and introducing agile in certain areas. So depending on what the call is of the program, each program has its own nuances, and you can come up with a delivery method and a way of working that is conducive to that program and to all those to each of the organizations working together. So those are the challenges you face in trying to set up the single program culture. How do you address this? Well, again, there is looking and understanding what the program has to achieve. So what is the aim of the project, the program? What do you want to achieve out of it? And based on that, having a shared commitment to the program as a whole. And how do you do that? Well, to overcome that, you establish and agree on a common way of working. So a method adoption workshop that at the beginning of the program, you bring the organizations, all the different organizations together, you work through and you look and you understand what is best and how you're going to do this, and you agree what that methodology is going to be and what the methods are, and making sure that the processes, for instance, your change management, your decision processes, your communication, all your different project management processes are agreed and aligned, and that everybody understands what that process is and how you deal with a problem. So when a problem does arise, this is the process to be followed from a decision perspective. What is the decisioning and what is the decision tree that you use to come to a final decision? And how is the decision made? There are different ways of getting to that. And that is where you make sure in your method adoption workshop, everybody works together and you agree how these processes are going to work. And then you enforce those processes. Once they have agreed, you enforce that they be followed and worked through. Secondly, is agreeing on the expectations and the goals and objectives of the program. As I mentioned earlier, we need to understand what that is. What is the aim of this project? Everybody needs to have that agreement that what the goals are and what the objectives are, and that is then the focus on achieving that. Third is around clear communication channels. So what does that mean, having clear communications? Well, you'll have your governance structure. So you'll have your performance, where your work gets done, your management layer, and then your escalation layer. You can go three-tiered governance structure, depending, or more or less, depending on the program. But the critical point here, or the critical factor, is that it is agreed by all, and you stick to it, and you work with it, and you go through it as you have defined it, and ensuring that there's no ambiguity in your communication, and that there's a single point within the program that communication gets disseminated from. That could be your status meetings, it could be your status reporting, it could be your information sharing sessions, as long as there is a single point that all communication comes from, and that everybody aligned, and that there are no mixed messages going through. The fourth area, which is a critical area, is around the leadership. Leadership plays a key point and a key role in ensuring and addressing these challenges. They have to have this in their minds all the time. And where things start deviating is to take corrective action and not allow things to happen and then just say, yeah, okay, it was a once-off. Because once-offs become 10 times it happens, and then you have lost that momentum. And it is critical that management and leadership on the program, your leaders on the program, are serious and buy into it and drive it from their perspective. The other point is to ensure that there is zero tolerance for cross-organizational finger pointing or blaming. Blaming or finger pointing has never served anybody and has in actual fact caused more problems and disrespect in all projects that I've worked on or had the privilege of working on, because there are ways to deal in a respectful manner to address any issues or concerns and in an open and transparent manner. And there is no need to have finger pointing, as long as there are clear expectations of what is expected, that there is accountability, and that the consequences are well understood of not meeting your accountability. Now, what I mean by consequences is that timelines may extend, your dependencies, other areas that have to do work are then delayed and causes a domino effect, or increased in resources, increased in budgets and financials. So those consequences need to be understood and managed and ensure that they do not happen. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it's to establish that momentum early on in the program, is to start from day one, bringing in these processes, bringing in this culture, working towards it. It doesn't happen overnight. And there will be roadblocks as you go along, and there will be road bumps as you continue and as you go through. But as long as you are prepared to work through those in a respectful manner and a transparent manner, so that is how you build then the single culture. And I'm going to come to, I think this is the fundamental slide that I want to share with you, and is the foundation of everything that I've been speaking about and working towards, is the fact that fundamentally trust is the glue and the adhesive that binds everything together. And once you have trust, you, from a program perspective, from a team perspective, things can happen in a seamless way. So how do you get trust? How do you build trust? Well, like I've said throughout this, there is accountability. There has to be accountability. With the accountability comes responsibility. I have a responsibility. If I'm accountable for that, I have the responsibility to ensure that that is done or that is met. With the responsibility comes commitment. I cannot take on responsibility without committing to something. And with commitment comes consequence. If I don't commit, there are no consequences, and then everything happens as you want and as you go ahead, and it just becomes chaos. So with commitment, you have to have consequences of those meeting and addressing those consequences. Ultimately, with taking on that consequence, you have vulnerability. With vulnerability, in order to have that comes trust. I have to have trust to ensure that there is vulnerability. So the trust enables open sharing of information. So once I have trust, I am prepared to share with you. I'm prepared to share with you my problems, my successes, my issues, and I know that you are going to, or the teams are going to work together for the betterment of the organization or the project to meet the project commitments. That provides willing collaboration. With the willing collaboration, you then have these sessions to talk, to work through and address any issues and come to a solution to align and make sure that the project is a success. There's smooth alignment to shared goals. You all understand what those goals are. You all work towards them and you all achieve them. And then trust, again, is the biggest contribution and essential for collective ownership and accountability. That is the glue. That is the foundation, is trust. And it doesn't happen overnight. This takes concerted effort, and it is critical to the success that you build in a program, and it takes time. It takes time to achieve this, but it's something that has to be worked on. So that's the presentation. From a conclusions and takeaway, I just want to recap So we spoke about what is a single program culture. This is really just everybody working on the program, working together towards a common goal, common understanding, and having their expectations fully understood. We went through what is the importance of a single program. Why is it important? Because then once we get that, we have a greater chance of success, and success goes up tremendously. Then we spoke about the challenges that we face and what are those challenges and how we address those challenges. And then what is the most important is around the importance of trust and gaining that trust of the program. Then the conclusion, your key takeaway. So what is the call to action here? So in order for you to be successful and to creating this single program culture, is that your leaders and your stakeholders have to make a commitment that this is, and drive that commitment and invest the time and the resources and ensuring that the single program culture is achieved. And it takes patience, it takes time and acknowledgement. Secondly, it requires trust building. You have to trust one another, and you've got to make sure that you build that trust. And building that trust, as I said to you, accountability, responsibility, vulnerability, consequences, and then trust. And you have to open and promote transparency, open dialogue, and ensure that no finger pointing happens and that everything works together. Mateo, thank you for this, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and to share my thoughts with the esteemed colleagues that are on the webinar. And I will move on to the next slide. Thank you, Mateo.
Thank you very much, Garry. Very interesting. We have collected some questions, so it's now time for question and answers. And we start from the first question raised by Andrea. So, program culture and different organization. Did it work also in case of different cultures where people were coming or working from different countries? Which additional changes did you face in this case where people were belonging even to different type of cultures?
Yes, absolutely, Mateo. The last program that we did do, we had 3 different geographical locations, 3 different areas, 3 different cultures coming in together as one. And what we did is that we brought the teams together. We had them all physically together, those that were the key resources on the program, and we went through specifically around the method adoption workshop. So what does it mean? So in this culture, this term means this. In this culture, it could mean something different. We aligned on what that all means and how that works together. And we aligned on the vocabulary. We sat down, we co-located together for a period of time where the people from the different cultures were together, and they got to know one another. They interacted with each other all together in a single environment, and that we saw helped tremendously working together physically and having a common language, building on that common language, understanding their cultural differences, and being open and prepared to speak about those cultural differences.
Okay, thanks. In fact, next question again raised by another Andrea. Team meetings were online, in presence, or hybrid? You have already partially answer to this, but there is another additional question, that is, which are the differences and difficulties to grow a single culture from online management or in presence? So which one did you perceive to work better, and any suggestion also on this?
Yeah, so we were fortunate. I think with the pandemic and with COVID changed a lot of things. We were very fortunate is that we had built up a strong team in person, and the culture started before the pandemic. So when we went online, that culture had already been set up, and we knew, and we could, from a online presence, it was basically sitting across the table from the other person. I think for us, what we did as well to continue the momentum of ensuring that the culture stayed alive when we did go online, and when everything was isolated, and the only way we could do it was via Zoom or via Teams or something like that, was the fact that we had social events. I'll give you an example. We did a cooking competition with all the teams. We brought in a chef who showed, and we gave us the recipe and demonstrated, and we actually did the cooking in our own homes, and it was all online. And what happened is you started having the competition between each other and the banter between each other, talking to one another and saying, yeah, you can't do this, or you can do this. Oh, that was a flop, or wow, that looks great. So you created an environment where people could be themselves, and it wasn't just work, or a meeting because you get fatigued. Yeah, you used that to collaborate with one another. But my preference ultimately is to bring everybody together in a single co-location. You build that single culture a lot quicker, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it online. You can, and you can ensure that that is done by focusing and having outside things and fun things, team building type of things happening.
Okay, thank you. A question from Marco. You mentioned your program lasted for 5 years, but how long does it take to build a program culture?
I think you set the foundation within, I think, probably it took us, I think, about 3-4 months before we really understood one another. Then I would say about another 3 months to then start trusting one another. So overall, I would say about 6 to 8 months that you start. After 8 months, well, in our case, after 8 months, we started reaping the benefits. Initially, in those 8 months, the first, I would say 4 months, 4 or 5 months, there was a lot of churn. There was a lot of backwards and forwards. There was a lot of understanding, discussions, challenges, working together. But as long as the leadership is there to control it and does not let it get out of hand, and call people out if it's unacceptable behavior, and to coach people and to work and mentor with people. It took us, I would say, the first 5 months there was churn, then things started getting better. And then after 8 months, we started reaping the benefits. And then you started seeing people collaborate and challenge one another, but in a respectful manner and for the betterment of the project, not for the individual.
Thank you. Next is from Sergio. The single program culture sounds to highlight the importance of strategic alignment. However, I also see how groupthink bias could become a negative factor while applying this method. Could you please expand how when change management should be considered or applied if groupthink bias begin to impact the project program scope creep?
Right. So if I understood what we did, what is absolutely critical is to understand and have a change management process. Now, if I understood the question correctly, I'm not talking about organizational change. You're talking about change management and the management of the scope of the project. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Yes, right. So in that aspect, the critical point is to ensure that you have a process that is defined and that there are rules and expectations within that process. Based on that, then you look at it and you ensure that the scope of the work, especially in the early stages of the program, is clearly understood on what the scope is, where the boundaries are of that scope, and then you manage that accordingly. Especially if you're going to have stakeholders coming in trying to influence that, there's no problem. Change is something is inevitable that will happen. That what we expected in the beginning to what we are now, things do change. But it's critical to have a defined process and understand the impacts, especially the scope, that what is in scope, what is out of scope, and what the definition of that scope is. That has to be clear. That is fundamental. That has to be done. Then you manage that scope accordingly and with the impacts. So if I want to change scope or I want to bring scope in, you understand what those impacts are, clearly understood and communicated. Now, PMI, everyone, that is fundamental, and that is the basics of what change management is. To be honest with you, if you stick to the basics of change management and you understand your scope and you have agreed your scope, change management should not be that difficult.
Okay, thank you. In fact, about change management, we were wondering when does the need to involve a change management start? Is it from the beginning or when already the path to build the program culture is already, let's say, started and triggered? And then which action or which practice of change management are in place or need to be in place?
I would say change management starts from the day the contract is signed and when the first workshop takes place. Then that is when change management starts, because through the method adoption workshops, you have to understand and you work through that scope and understanding what is meant by the contract, what is meant. So the change management starts day one, as well as the single culture, the single program culture starts from day one. That is from a project change perspective. From an organizational change management perspective, you also start that change from day one. The intensity of the organizational change is, in the beginning, is slight, and then it builds up as the program goes. And as the program goes ahead, so does the intensity of that organizational change happen. From a project change perspective, that happens from day one. And once you have finalized and agreed, and the BRD, and this is a critical point, when the BRD has been signed, because every single project, no matter what project you're doing, has to have a BRD, a business requirements document that states what the objectives, what the requirements of this program and what it has to achieve. Once that has been signed and agreed, then the change management process kicks in. Up until that point, there is room for change and discussion, as long as the contract allows for it. And it's the expectations, ensuring that the expectations of the scope are well understood.
I think it's okay.
Okay, Garry, thanks. There are also many thanks from Etienne that describe the session as very insightful. We have a question, therefore, in program management, the Scrum Mastery methodology is used as a strong tool. However, do you believe it is a fit-for-purpose methodology that can be integrated into a single program culture well, or should it rather be avoided, seeing that the Scrum Mastery methodology could lead to a vast differences in opinion amongst stakeholders?
That's a very good question. I think, to be quite honest with you, it depends what the role of the Scrum Master is and what in what situation they're going to bring it in. If you're going to have a software development type project, I think the Scrum Master and the Agile methodology is very critical under the development and the of that software. If there's a change, if it's a base software and there are changes, absolutely the Scrum Master, the product owner is critical in showing what, from a project perspective, the implementation side of it is ensuring that then the requirements or the functional requirements or the non-functional requirements are being met and are being, the expectations are being met well. So I think there's a role for both, depending on the type of project you have. I think ultimately, I'm one of those that believes in strong project management and program management, and I believe that the project manager or the program manager has accountability of the overall project and ensures the success of the project, or is accountable to ensure the success. The Scrum Master is a role within that program or project and has a specific role. So you can blend them. I don't think it's just one or the other.
Okay, thank you, Garry. Next question related always to stakeholder that was brought up in the previous one. Did you do stakeholder mappings?
Absolutely. I think it's very critical to do your stakeholder mapping and understand your stakeholders. Now, that takes place, and you have different types of stakeholders, as you would know. And it is critical to have that, to understand how you're going to manage your stakeholders and what influence they have on the project. Because in order to create a single program culture, you have to have your key stakeholders part of that culture. They cannot be outside of this. And it is critical to identify them and to map them and understand the influence.
Thanks. You talked before about the way of working. So in this way of working in your programs, how did you define templates, tools, or a collaboration tool amongst different teams and organization?
Right. So I think, depending now, generally your client is, if you're bringing in different organizations coming in, the client will always either have their own methodology, their own templates that they have, or again, it comes down to their collaboration tools. So depending on what the client has, if they have any tools available or templates available, then you would use that as a base. And then in your method adoption workshop that you would have, you would agree what that collaboration tool would be. I mean, there are many out there. Some people use Slack, some people use Teams, some people use all sorts of stuff. But then it becomes to say, right, this is the tool of choice. Again, it comes down to the organization, the customer, where you're working, and what tools they have, because obviously there are security concerns and how the security works within their organization and how they bring things in. So there's many factors that will go into defining what collaboration tools you will use. Similarly, from a template perspective, if the customer does not have that, then you would propose and say, you know, in your method adoption workshop, you would say, these are the templates we would use. This is how we would use them, and then agree that collaboratively.
Okay, thank you. I have one question that I raised while you were talking, because I like very much your approach to vulnerability and trust. So how did you measure them into your programs? Is it, let me say, soft measure, or how did you do it?
So I think the way we measured it, what we saw was the fact that you started having less conflict. You started having teams collaborating in an open forum where there were not arguments, but discussions that happened more. So you had less arguments, less finger pointing, and less abrasiveness in your discussions. And you started having the problem solving started happening a lot faster and solutions coming up a lot quicker. This was all soft. We did not measure it quantitatively, and we did it qualitatively, where we saw the benefits in meetings and when we had issues, and in the status meetings. There was less challenging in the status meetings because the challenging had been done earlier, and agreement before the status meeting, and then what was presented in the status meetings was one that had agreement. And that's where we saw the benefit coming through.
Okay, we have one last question before we move to the final part. That is, how did you face budget revision in your programs with so many different organizations?
So in ours, we had a very, for each organization or each vendor that came in that worked had a very specific budget that they had provided at the early onset based on the scope. So we managed the budget holistically, but separately for each vendor or organization. And that worked very well. When we were in change meetings, the cost of that fund, the cost was not shared across organizations. It was discussed internally. The solution was discussed across, but the cost was kept between the vendor and the client, and we managed it that way.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Garry. May I ask you to please move to next slide?
Okay.
So here are our next appointment in March. We are going to meet on the 20th with la gestione del rischio nei progetti sportivi. It's in Aperinic in Torino. Then we have a branch planned for the 27 of March, build and lead the team, intelligenza emotiva come competenza per il PM. And on the 4th of April, we are going to meet to talk about communities of practice. Next, please. I just remind everyone, and also you, Garry, that with this event, you will become one of our speaker, for which we are going to plant a new tree in the forest. This is an initiative of the PMI NIC chapter, and therefore also this one will be applied for this special webinar with you. I just also remind everyone, please, to the next, that the PDU will be assigned automatically within 10-15 days. And in case you are interested in the communication and in the deck that Garry has shown with us, please write us to our email address. Garry, if you could please go to the next, we are going to share our email. For any question, you can contact events@pmi-nic.org. Thanks again, Garry. Thank you for your availability, your collaboration in all of this week preparing this event. It was very nice and insightful. Again, thanks.
Thank you very much, Matteo, and thank you so much for Nick for inviting me. And this is a real great honor. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. See you next time. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.